William McCartney, a.k.a. William H. Bonney, a.k.a. Billy the Kid. How did he die? And who killed him? So, the governor of New Mexico paid Pat Garrett $500 to agree to kill him, and $500 after he killed him, and Pat Garrett shot him in the back. Which is an extremely cowardly thing to do, and it's an extremely cowardly thing to admit to do, particularly when nobody saw you do it. You would not have to, when there's no witnesses, say that you shot your best friend in the back in the dark of night while he was unarmed. You wouldn't have to do that. Particularly when you dug the hole, you buried him, you rode back to the Capitol, and you collected the rest of the bounty. Could have said it was a fair fight. Could have said he got the jump on me, but I was quicker. Could have said he had 2 guns and 2 friends, and I took them all out. Could have made this a really glorious story. And Pat Garrett wasn't above lying. He wasn't even above killing. He wasn't above anything. He wasn't above stealing. And he came with the story that I shot my best friend in the dark of night in the back while he was unarmed, and then I buried him. They said, well, where did you bury him? And he had a grave. It wasn't as though the body was never discovered, right? And we've been told stories where the body was never discovered. We even decided that it rose on the 7th day and was divine. Like, we can accept a lot of things as human beings when we want to believe it. But Pat had an answer to it. He had the grave, and he knew where the body was, and there was a guy that watched him bury it. He didn't watch him kill him. He didn't watch him shoot him. He didn't watch him hide out. Guy didn't say it was in the dark of night. It was in the back, and that Billy was unarmed. Pat said all of those things, but a guy did help him dig the hole and help him put the body in it. And when they asked Pat where he put the body, he did have an answer. And they went there, and there was a body. So great, he got paid his money. Billy was never heard from again. Pat started up a restaurant, raised a family, stayed there till he got shot and killed. So that was back in the 1800s. 1889 comes to mind. I could be off a couple of years, but you understand. In the turn of the century, there was major changes. I mean, Henry Ford put the first Model T on the roads in 1914, just to put in perspective for you. So there's a massive difference, right? There's a massive difference in 1889 when Billy was killed. There was no technology. But then very quickly, right, only 20 years later, all of a sudden, we got an automobile on the road. You got a very different time. So then, when the year 1950 rolls around, you have a very different world. Joe Biden was born in the 1940s, to put in perspective for you. So now you have 1950. You have a very different world, and a guy comes forward, and he's about to die. He's an old man. His name was Brushy Bill Roberts. And he said, I would like the pardon that I was promised many years ago. They said, why were you promised a pardon? He said, because I am Billy the Kid. Pat Garrett did not kill me. Pat Garrett was my best friend. He let me go. He shot somebody else, and he buried somebody else. DNA didn't exist. There was no way to exhume bodies and then tell who it was. There was no way to get hair samples or bone. You understand DNA, right? None of these things existed. And the reporter that he went to said, do you have any scars? Do you have proof? Do you have evidence? He took his shirt off. He had 8 bullet holes through him. He had all sorts of stab wounds through himself. He said, here's my evidence. And the ages kind of matched up, right? You look at this Brushy Bill, and you're trying to guess how old he is. You're trying to juxtapose that against the 21-year-old Billy the Kid that was shot in the back in the dark of night while unarmed by his best friend. And you can see where the ages probably will get you pretty close. But we still are going to need some evidence. We're going to need some evidence that you can even tie yourself back to the Lincoln County Wars. And that's where Brushy Bill had a hard time. He had several people that were around back then. Even people that knew John Tunstall and said, yes, that's him. We've been hiding him. That is Billy the Kid. There were several people that said that. There were several people, including family members, that said this guy's crazy, and a decade ago, he was workshopping the same story, except he was claiming that he was Jesse James. But those very family members that were distant, those very family members that denied it, also said he'd never been shot, and also said he'd never been stabbed. And when he took his shirt off, he'd been shot 8 times, and he'd been stabbed a plethora of times. There was very limited info on the actual Billy the Kid. There is only one photograph that can be authenticated that is the real Billy the Kid. Only one. But there's stories of his hat size. There's stories of the placement of his ears. There's stories that he has big wrists with small hands. And he was in the confinement of the Lincoln County Jail, and he was handcuffed, and he did escape. And the reason he could escape is because he had big wrists. So when they put the cuffs on him, they were here, but if he could just slide it over the wrist, his hands were small and the cuffs would come right off. That's the story. Brushy Bill had the same hat size. He had the same ear placement. He had the same big wrists and little hands. He had the same boot size. This is all reported stuff, and I'm saying reported by who? I live in a modern time, and I'm famous. Not being a dick, I am. You don't know my hat size, and neither do I. You don't know my boot size. If I was to die today, somebody comes out 50 years later, says they're me. You're not going to compare their feet with my feet, but they're claiming that they had that on Billy the Kid, that Brushy Bill Roberts had the same hat size and boot size as the official Billy the Kid. Who kept those records? Don't come at me with this stupid stuff. Just don't. Don't tell me that stupid stuff, please. But I also can't explain why people that were around the Lincoln County Wars are claiming with their good name, they're old people too, they're going to die too, they want to die with a good reputation, and they're claiming under oath that that man, Brushy Bill Walters, is in fact Billy the Kid. And his own family that said he wasn't said, matter of fact, he can't even speak Spanish, and Billy the Kid was fluent in Spanish. So a reporter tried to throw Brushy Bill off. And he didn't say, I need to know that you can speak Spanish. He just yelled a question to him in Spanish while the other reporters were yelling. And Billy heard the question and answered him. Brushy Bill answered the question. His own family said he didn't speak Spanish. He spoke fluent Spanish. And he had the stab wounds, and he had the bullet marks. And he told another story that he was there the day John Tunstall was buried. And that is what jammed him up. Because there was a written report of who was there the day John Tunstall was buried, and Billy was not there. Then they went to the actual people that gave the story, and they said, yes, he was there, and we told the reporter he was there. The reporter 31 years ago miswrote it. And you started to have these things on Brushy Bill that were coming out that were in line with Billy the Kid, but Pat Garrett was a snake. So if Pat Garrett is to work something out with Billy, right? This is the old Vince McMahon. You hit the Pride Fighting Championships, right? The promoter hits the locker room and comes up with a story. You're going to go this way and never be heard of again. I'm going to murder this guy, and then I'm going to bury him. Quickly. I'm going to cover you, Bill. I'm going to put out a story that I shot you in the back. Nobody wants to be known as a coward that shot an unarmed man in the back in the dark of night, but I'm going to do it, and that's why people are going to believe me. But if you ever pop your head up again, they're going to come and hang me. And that is a risk that a snake like Pat Garrett would not have taken. And you won't convince me that he did. You won't convince me that he covered for Billy the Kid, who he was never going to see again, and put his own reputation on the line. And moreover on the story, the fact that Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett were best friends is not true. They were light acquaintances at best. But that doesn't mean that Pat didn't try to shoot him in the back and try to kill him. That doesn't even mean that Pat doesn't think he did kill him. And that's where the story could actually be fathomable. For them to get together and work this out, that did not happen. There was no telephones. There was no emails. There was no way for them to communicate. But for Billy to have been in that territory of New Mexico and have somebody else that looked like Billy shot in the back of the dark of night, Pat Garrett looked down and realized what he did, dig a hole real fast, bury him, and go back home and collect the money. Story gets to Billy. Billy thinks, Pat thinks I'm dead. All I got to do is disappear. All I got to do is go change my name and lay low. You used to be able to rob a bank, move 2 towns over, and never be caught for your whole life, right? I mean, when there was no internet and there was no Facebook and there was no Twitter, it's very easy to get away with things. So he didn't even have to leave New Mexico. It is very possible that Brushy Bill Roberts was, in fact, Billy the Kid. It's very possible, but not on purpose. And not because Pat and Billy worked something out like the promoters in Pride when they'd hit the locker room and tell the guy when to go down. Would have been a mistake. Pat would have tried to kill Billy. Pat would have shot the right guy. Pat then would have juxtaposed, do I want to hang for murder since I shot him in the dark in the back while he was unarmed and I'm a sheriff? Or do I want to just say it was Bill? Hope that he hears, hope that he lay lows, go collect my ransom from the governor. What do I want to do? Those were the options. And if you look at it in that vein and you understand there wasn't a great conspiracy, that's where your mind can start to make a leap that Brushy Bill was, in fact, Billy the Kid. Now, if you've heard these stories and you want Chael, who's an expert on it, to ruin it for you, it's all hogwash. Pat shot him.